This is a KGB defector by the name of Yuri Benzanov. He's one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. In 1984, he gave this interview where he states, "Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare." What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, or their country. It is a great brainwashing process which goes very slow and is divided into 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 30 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years required to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy. In other words, Marxism, Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students. From another interview, he expands on demoralization, because this is key. We're totally in this demoralized state. This is the process which can take about 15 to 30 years to perform. During this stage, the moral fiber and integrity of the country is put into question, thereby creating doubts in the minds of the people. To do so, manipulation of the media and academia is required to influence young people. As the younger generation embraces new values, such as Marxism and Leninism, the older generation slowly loses control simply through attrition. Again, true facts no longer matter during this stage, but rather creating perceptions are paramount. He continues, without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism, the demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already for 25 years. And this was 1983. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not all the experts would have dreamed of. It's been such a tremendous success because most of it's done by Americans to Americans thanks to a lack of moral standards, as I mentioned before. Exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who is demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I show him information with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camps, he will refuse to believe it until he receives a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crushes his balls, then he will understand, but not before. That is the tragic situation of demoralization. In order to better understand who and why this demoralization has taken place to such a great extent that we have an epidemic of effeminate men in America and the West, first, we'll take a look at the history and the philosophy of Marxism-Leninism. Next. The philosophy of Marxism-Leninism originated as a proactive political praxis of the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Socialist Democratic Labor Party in realizing political change in Tsarist Russia. Leninism allowed the Bolshevik Party to assume command in the October Revolution in 1917. For the next few slides, I will be referencing Spreading the Errors of Russia, a YouTube video by Sensus Fidelium. Marxist theory taught that when a great war finally broke out between the nations, the working classes would unite and overthrow the governments. Because according to Marxist theory, the workers of the world have much more in common with each other than they do with the bourgeoisie or the ruling class in their own countries. But when World War I broke out, the workers of the world did not unite with one another. They fought each other. The British working men fought Great Britain. The French working man fought France. The German working man fought for Germany, and so forth. Not surprisingly, it turned out that any given working man was more loyal to his country than he was to the counterparts from other countries. From a Marxist perspective then, World War I was a colossal flop. In 1917, the Marxists finally seized power in Russia. It looked like the theory was working, but it did not spread after the war. So a series of attempts were made to spread the revolution. there was a briefly lived Soviet Republic of Bavaria. They held power for 6 months in 1918. In 1919, the communist uprising in Berlin. In 1919, the Soviet Republic of Hungary, which held up for 133 days. But once again, the workers didn't support these. So the Marxist regimes were quickly closed. Something was wrong. Marxism had a problem. It wasn't working. So what to do? Next. Cultural Marxism. Independently, two Marxist theorists, George Lucas of Hungary and Antonio Gramsci of Italy, came up with the same solutions and are credited with being the fathers of Western version of Marxism. It's called Cultural Marxism. They both taught that communism was impossible in the West until both Western civilization and Christianity were destroyed, since they blinded the working class to its true Marxist intents. George Lucas recognized the great obstacle to the creation of a Marxist regime was Western civilization itself. He said, "I can see revolution and destruction of society as the only solution for a worldwide overturning of values. This cannot take place without the annihilation of the old values and the creation of new ones." So there, in a nutshell, we have the agenda of cultural Marxism explained by one of its creators, George Lucas. Antonio Gramsci, the other creator of cultural Marxism, argued that the West would have to be de-Christianized by means of what he entitled the long march to the institutions. What he meant by this was that the culture must be the new battleground, and that all the barriers to the acceptance of Marxism must be removed or reconfigured according to Marxist principles. All cultural barriers to accept Marxism should be reconfigured, starting with the family, i.e., perverting gender roles, removing the rule of the father, going through the churches, the arts, cinema, theater, literature, science, history, entertainment, schools, colleges, universities, seminaries, civic organizations, the organs of mass media, newspapers, magazines, radio, television, and so forth. We're there. Next. So what basically happened? How did we go from a theory, a Marxist theory in Germany, in Europe, to what we've got today, which is a nation of emasculated, effeminate men? So what happened? Basically, we've forgotten or have been demoralized to such an extent that we've forgotten who we are. Our common principles, even the things as basic as what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, are completely lost. That's how perverted we've become. That's how demoralized we've become through this ideological subversion that most of us don't even know what's going on. And there's a lot of people that support this and love this shit. Quoting the great historian Christopher Dawson, who reflected on the consequences if society were to lose its common principles and ideals, this is what would happen. It is easy enough for an individual to adopt a negative attitude of critical skepticism. But if the society as a whole abandons all positive beliefs, it becomes powerless to resist the disintegrating effects of selfishness and private interest. Every society rests in the last person on the recognition of common principles and common ideals, and if it makes no moral or spiritual appeal to the loyalty of its members, it must inevitably fall to pieces. So here we are watching what little remains of Western civilization and masculinity completely falling to pieces, or more accurately, being smashed to pieces, which is the explicit goal of cultural Marxism. It's working real well. So a deeper question is, how do we move from Marxist theory in Germany to a total annihilation of American and Western masculinity? How did we get here? Next. Now this rabbit hole goes very deep. This is a lot of information. Since time is short, we're going to focus for just a moment on the Frankfurt School. George Lucas, we mentioned before, played an important role in the founding of the Frankfurt School in Germany. The school was founded in 1923 with a primary goal of translating Marxism from economic terms and political terms into cultural terms. The Frankfurt School may have turned out to be a little more than a historical oddity had Hitler not come to power in 1933. Given that every member was not only a Marxist but also Jewish, they fled Germany with the help of Columbia University. The school reestablished itself in New York City, at which point they shifted their focus from destroying traditional Western culture in Germany to destroying it in the United States. They believe there are two kinds of revolutions, political and cultural. They kept their focus on the Cultural Revolution. One of its members comments, "One can rightly speak of a cultural revolution, since the protest is directed towards the whole cultural establishment, including the morality of existing society. There is one thing we can say with complete assurance. The traditional idea of revolution, the traditional strategy of revolution, has ended. The ideas are old-fashioned. What we must undertake is a type of diffuse and disparate disintegration of the system." With reference to the system, meaning patriarchy, church, patriotism, country, and paternity, father and family, all derived from the root word pater, meaning pattern, meaning father. If you want to destroy a culture, you take out the father, the pater, its root pattern. They also recognized that the working class in America was not going to lead a Marxist revolution because it was becoming a part of the middle class. America was doing great. We had no beef, nobody. Becoming a part of the middle class or the bourgeoisie, the great middle class in America. Who then would lead a revolution in the 1950s? Herbert Marcuse answers, "The coalition will be made up of blacks, students, feminist women, and homosexuals." By crossing Marx with Freud, they invented something called critical theory. Today you hear it called critical race theory. Critical theory involves making the most destructive criticisms of every possible cultural norm in order to destroy the current social order. That's its purpose, as is Marxism. For example, anyone who is successful or holds a position of power is labeled as an oppressor. Those who are not successful are victims. Also, someone who defends the notion that there's actually different social roles for women and men, they're a male chauvinist or a misogynist. Strongmen, alpha males, fathers are the patriarchy, they're tyrants, and so on. Over time, their influential writings continue to pour out contempt on the different institutions, the traditional family, the churches, the arts, cinema, theater, literature, science, history. It's everywhere. In institutions of so-called higher education, cultural Marxism was more commonly known as multiculturalism and more loosely known as political correctness. And this is where we are. The Frankfurt School also adopted techniques of psychological conditioning. Today, for example, if the foot soldiers want to do something like normalize transsexuality, they don't argue the point philosophically. They just make Bruce Jenner into a woman, next, and put him on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine and call you a racist if you don't agree. Woman of the Year.